Hello and good morning. Hopefully you can all see and hear me clearly. If not, just pop a message in the chat. So good morning. Good morning from warm and sunny Bristol, and welcome to the Bristol Green Capital Partnership's COP26, Cities versus the Climate and Nature Crises. I am Katie Hodgetts. Says I'm very quiet. Let's try and project. Let me know if that works okay. I am a youth environmental activist and founder of the Resilience Project, which is building peer support communities in different cities in the UK for young people engaging with the climate crisis. And I work in the space of community resilience, so how we can create meaningful and inclusive communities to support each other through change, which seems very fitting for the discussion we're going to be having today. So I'm thrilled to be hosting what promises to be a rich and fertile 2 hours with you all. You can tweet about the event using our hashtag, Cities versus Crises. And you can also tag the partnership at B Green Partnership, and you can also tag me at KT Climate. So a bit of housekeeping first. It is really distracting. I want to just read all of the messages in the chat, but first of all, you're all muted and you all have your videos off by default, which is a shame because I would love to see all 150 of you, but it might be a bit distracting. But we're not just going to be having a one-way dialogue, because we're inviting your active participation by posting reflections in the chat box throughout. You're already using the chat function, but an invitation to introduce yourself, your location, your organisation, and what we really want to know, which is what's the weather like where you are. So please use the chat function for that. Secondly, we also have the Q&A function. So if you have questions for our incredible panelists today, please use the Q&A button, which you just should see on your Zoom, and you'll be able to vote for the questions you most want to see asked. So please start your question with your name, your organisation, and highlight whether it's directed to the whole panel or just a particular speaker. So you can do that throughout the next hour and a half, where we'll be hearing about the intersectional work being done by cities to take action on the climate and ecological crisis. We're going to be hearing from speakers such as Polly Billington, Chief Executive of UK 100, from councillors in the cities of Glasgow, Bristol, Newcastle, from existing initiatives from different stakeholders throughout Bristol, and of course, we'll be involving you, the audience, in an interactive panel discussion a bit later. So a really exciting 2 hours that we're going to spend together today. But firstly, I would like to take the next 7-ish minutes to open up with why cities are so important to me as a vehicle for change. So I started engaging with youth climate activism about 5 years ago, and the problem seemed so overwhelmingly big to me that I thought that national government legislation was our only option for change. So big problem equals big solution. So in 2018, I coordinated a group of young people in our year-long anti-fracking campaign. We gave it 100%. For example, we blockaded a fracking site for 3 days. We created petitions aimed at the Minister for Clean Growth, and we tried to mobilise and empower other young folk to push for national policy change. But winning, the elusive winning, often felt intangible, and our impact felt minimal, and those in power didn't seem to listen to the youth voice. At one point, we actually sat outside Westminster with duct tape on our mouths, carrying over 500 letters from youth calling to ban fracking. And we sat in silence for 8 hours with duct tape to demonstrate how the youth voice was being ignored in decision-making. And even after that, in the wet and the cold, we still didn't get a meeting with the minister. We were very much in a one-way dialogue. So it got me thinking about where power is held, where it can be reclaimed, and where change is possible. So fast forward 3 months after this campaign, and I was building Bristol Youth Strike for Climate with an incredible 13-year-old named Zoe. We gradually expanded our team from 2 to 30 and coordinated monthly strikes and marches throughout Bristol. Sorry if anyone on this call was held up in traffic. One month we had 200 attendees. That was amazing. The next we had 500, even better. And the next we had over 2,000 young people chanting, "Stop the airport expansion, shutting down one of Bristol's busiest roads." And I found that my team were now not sitting in silence outside Westminster, but now sitting in a room with Mayor Marvin Rees. A year later, and we weren't sat opposite Rees anymore, we were now opposite Greta Thunberg in Bristol City Cathedral right before I delivered a speech about the power of city mobilisation for climate justice and introduced her on stage to 30,000 people in Bristol. So what I want to emphasize through that very summarized and condensed journey is that cities gave me the space to reimagine what winning looks like. When winning was defined by national policy change, there was less joy in my work, no dialogue beyond my immediate team, who were mostly white middle class, and no actual meaningful representation of the communities being impacted by fracking firsthand. But cities provided a chance to have a multifaceted dialogue with people and communities who have experiential knowledge of the issues we're dealing with. So instead of Westminster, cities have more exposed pockets of power to be reclaimed by those often marginalized from national decision making. And for me, that was young people who are systematically excluded from affecting change with their vote if they're under 18. So our organisation became a conduit between youth representatives and Bristol City Council. And through city work, we were able to interact with lots of different stakeholders. So for our Greta strike, we had a British Sign Language interpreter and an intergenerational team of steward volunteers. So it gave more opportunities for a deeper democratic process. And Bristol Youth Strike was just one tiny, tiny star in an incredible constellation of city change makers, which led to the Bristol airport expansion being stopped and Bristol becoming the first city in the UK to declare a climate emergency. Thank you, Carla Denya. I'm sure we'll be hearing about that a lot throughout this next 2 hours. So change is possible. And that story literally tracks a journey in 2 years from duct tape over my mouth to screaming for climate justice to 30,000 people. So after this, I founded the Resilience Project, which speaks to high rates of eco-anxiety and burnout in the youth movement by fortifying a generation of resilient climate change makers. And our chosen terrain is cities. So this year I've trained young people to deliver 8-week resilience courses for other people like them in 6 different cities, meaning that our theory of change is to empower those within existing movements already doing the work to encourage depth transformation and build a resilient community in the process. And that's hugely been inspired by seeing the power of cities. So by reclaiming power, cities give more people a chance to sit at the table. However, we need to ensure that this power shift is not just being transferred to those already represented in conversations. The chance to increase dialogue must first and foremost be a listening exercise. And we'll hear some incredible examples of power shift later on. So I now know that a big problem is not solved by a big solution. COP26 is part of the solution, but not the solution entirely. And a big problem is solved by an even bigger table with thousands of seats and thousands of different solutions. It's solved by challenging our current understanding of power and who gets it. So to summarize, why are cities important? 3 reasons. 1, the facts. We know that cities use over 2/3 of the world's energy and emit more than 70% of the world's carbon emissions. So cities are undeniably a crucial place for change. 2, they reimagine what winning looks like. Winning is no longer just national policy change, but it's located in small group projects, community engagement, mobilizing youth strikers. So in this new paradigm of winning, we stop saying at a national level, less climate change, but at a local level, more bike lanes, more intersectional art, more consultations with the community, more green mingles, more mobilization, more agency over change. And thirdly, cities are important because they offer a power shift. But now it's our moment to answer the question, to who and to where? So we're going to move on and get going. And first, we're going to be hearing an update from the Bristol Green Capital Partnership. And we're going to be hearing specifically from Amy Harrison. Amy is the Community Project Manager and will be introducing the partnership and giving an overview of some of the work they're doing in the run-up to COP26. Over to you, Amy.
Great, and thank you, Katie, for such an awesome introduction to this morning's event. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be able to welcome you all today on behalf of Bristol Green Capital Partnership. The partnership is a unique network of over 1,000 member organisations working collectively for a fair and green future. Our mission is to enable organisations of every size and sector across the city to work together to tackle the climate and nature challenges we face. We do this by helping to share information and inspiration, offering opportunities for collaboration and connection, and amplifying and mobilising climate and community sector voices through our programmes. We couldn't, of course, do this without the support of our funders, our supporting members and sponsors, to whom we are, of course, very grateful. So we are fast approaching COP26, an important moment for global action on climate and nature, and an opportunity to galvanise further change here in Bristol. In the run-up to this significant event, the partnership is calling for a step change in efforts to tackle the climate and nature crises, for justice and inclusion to be at the heart of how that change happens, and for collaboration to be central to how we make this change a reality. And you can read more about the partnership's COP26 key messages in a new blog post on our website, which will be shared in the chat just now. So tackling the climate crisis goes hand in hand with social justice. As Bristol and other cities transition to a green economy, it's vital that it's a fair and inclusive transition and that no one gets left behind. We want to see bold, transformative climate action, with those with more resource and more responsibility for emissions taking greater responsibility. We want local communities to be empowered and enabled to shape the transition, especially those who will be most affected by climate and nature breakdown and the changes needed to tackle them. As we can only tackle these challenges if we work together, we want everyone to think creatively about how they can engage and support others. At the partnership, our contribution to this important and urgent work is currently taking the form of the following. First up, the Community Climate Action Project, which is supporting and empowering diverse communities across the city to develop co-created community climate action plans that deliver both climate and quality of life benefits for local people. Secondly, the Black and Green Ambassadors Programme, which nurtures environmental leaders from diverse backgrounds, challenges perceptions, creates new opportunities, and works towards a more inclusive and representative environmental movement. And you can find out more about both of these important programmes at an upcoming Festival of the Future City Just Transition event, which is taking place on the afternoon of the 20th of October. And the link's just about to go in the chat, and bookings open on Monday. And then finally, our Climate Action Programme, which supports organisations to reduce their carbon emissions and includes the Climate Leaders Group. Our next Climate Action Breakfast as part of the programme is taking place on the 12th of October, and that's focusing on how to create or update an engaging climate action plan. So check the chat now for a direct link to book a place. As a city, Bristol has already shown ambition and leadership by being the first local authority to declare climate and ecological emergencies, and through the development of its One City climate and ecological strategies. Whilst there's no question that we need to accelerate our response to the climate and nature crises, it's also critical to ensure that economic and social injustices are also tackled at the same time. The Institute for Public Policy Research calls for people to be at the heart of decision-making on climate action in its recent report, Fairness and Opportunity, a people-powered plan for the green transition. Here in Bristol, we're on a journey to put those principles of fairness and opportunity into action through our Community Climate Action Project, supported by the Lottery's Climate Action Fund and working with 6 inspiring grassroots community organisations who together represent the very broad diversity of our city. There's been much talk of levelling up as we emerge from the COVID pandemic. There's even a new minister responsible for it. But what does that mean for people in reality? We hear a lot of rhetoric about how we should build back better, greener, fairer. But how does that translate to real, tangible change for both the climate and people's lives and well-being? COVID exposed and compounded many existing inequalities in our communities. The analogy of the pandemic being a great leveller was bandied about a lot. But as author Damien Barr put it, we are not all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm. Some of us are on super yachts. Some of us have just one oar. A pre-COVID quality of life survey for Bristol highlighted that 88% of the city's residents were concerned about climate change. And a post-COVID survey of public opinion by Climate Outreach recently found that people's concern about climate change remains high. But just as the recent IPCC report has been described as a code red for humanity, we also need to acknowledge and respond to the fact that many in our communities right now are also experiencing a code red for their mental, physical and economic well-being following the pandemic. Bristol, like most, is not an equal city. Average life expectancy of residents living in my diverse inner city Bristol neighbourhood is 10 years lower than those in more affluent parts of the city. I'm sure that those of you here today from across the UK witness similar levels of inequality in your cities. So how can we prioritise and enable a just and fair transition to net zero in our cities? Challenging this social inequality is at the heart of Bristol's Community Climate Action Project, co-designed in collaboration with 4 dynamic geographic communities who also happen to experience multiple deprivation, and 2 organisations dedicated to working with and for the disabled and refugee communities. The project has 3 core principles. Firstly, action on inequality. Our community level response to the climate emergency must deliver both on the ambition for Bristol to be net zero by 2030 and in tandem improve people's quality of life, life chances and well-being. Secondly, co-production. Developing community-led climate action plans that are equitably co-designed by and with communities themselves, rather than the all too often top-down approach. And thirdly, community leadership. Community organisations demonstrated significant leadership during the pandemic. In many cases, they stepped up and filled the gap in the local civic COVID response, at times when councils and governments couldn't. We believe their significant leadership in tackling the climate emergency is essential and shouldn't be underestimated. Community organisations are also experts of their place and lived experience, and so are best equipped to develop pragmatic and innovative solutions which work for their specific communities. Alongside governmental, business and individual action, community-led climate action is a critical piece of the jigsaw. The project's aim is for each of the communities to develop their own detailed community-led climate action plan and a set of priorities to help achieve a net zero Bristol by 2030. A crucial starting point for developing these plans has been taking the time to listen and really understand where local people are at in their lives following the pandemic. The climate won't, and in some cases can't, be a priority for many as they emerge from the impacts of COVID, not because they don't care, but because they have so many other immediate pressures on their lives. Cuts to universal credit, the fear of having to choose between keeping warm and feeding themselves due to the rise in gas bills this winter. One Bristolian involved in the project shared this. It's not that I don't care about climate, I really do. But if you're in pain right now, both emotionally, physically, financially, it's hard to think about dealing with the pain that might come tomorrow in terms of climate change, when you're consumed with dealing with the immediate pain of today in terms of rent, fuel bills, childcare, unemployment, mental health. What we need to start doing is intrinsically interweaving our climate action and social justice ambitions and objectives together, both on the ground and at a strategic level. The two aren't mutually exclusive, and citizens really do get the connection between them. After all, insulating housing stock reduces energy poverty and provides a healthier living environment. This can be especially important for members of the disabled community. Easy access to quality green and growing space and nature improves mental and physical health and reduces social isolation and food poverty, particularly for older people and the refugee community. Encouraging safe, active travel reduces air pollution, improves health, and reduces transport costs for families living on lower incomes. And creating quality, new green jobs for young people most impacted by the COVID pandemic provides career and social mobility opportunities for the next generation. Our response to the climate emergency and the nature emergency could also be a unique pivotal opportunity to turn that levelling up rhetoric into reality and to turn the tide on some of the systemic inequality that we've seen worsen in recent years. I'm pretty sure all of us here today agree we must act now on climate. But I urge you and the cities, organisations and communities that you represent to ensure that your response to the climate and nature emergencies also has fairness and equity at its heart, and that collectively you work with others to take bold, transformative action on both climate and social inequality. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for that powerful overview of the partnership's work and for connecting the dots between climate and social justice. I'm now going to introduce Hello, I think I just got bumped out of the meeting. Hopefully everybody can hear and see me again. And I'm going to swiftly hand over to our headline speaker, Polly Billington. Polly is the Chief Executive of UK 100, and Polly is going to give an overview of how cities can and are taking bold steps on climate and nature. So please do share your reflections in the chat. We'd love to keep the dialogue flowing, and a reminder to use the Q&A function for any questions. Thank you, Polly.
Thanks very much, Katie, and truly an inspiring introduction to today's event. I absolutely identified with a lot of your experience of campaigning on climate. I've been doing it, I think, probably I was calculating the other day, probably about more than 30 years on and off on environment. So I started when I was probably about the same age as you. And my experience was sort of similar in that why wasn't I getting any traction? And understanding where power lies is probably the most important thing you can do when you want to be able to change things. And so your story really resonated with me, and maybe it's taken me a little bit longer than you to realize that the absolutely key place to be able to make a difference is the closest place to where you are, because sometimes that's the power that you can influence. But we do need to be able to change at every single level, and finding coalitions of people who not only want change but can affect change in their own communities and using their own powers and levers is really crucial. Apparently, people can only see the top of my head. I'm slightly surprised at that, because normally I'm quite good. Oh my goodness, yeah, it's popped up because I had to shift my screen. Is that better? Can you all see me now? I know I have my hair cut. Maybe I was just showing my haircut off. Anyway, you can see me now, which is so much better. Anyway, so absolutely understand how change happens, where you can build coalitions with people who've already got power, who share your values, is really crucial. And that's, I think, one of the things that's particularly important about the story that you've given us, Katie, about your experience and my experience of working with our network. Because the reality is we've now got people with decision-making power who have ambition to be able to make these things happen. They might not have all the powers that are needed, and that's why we need to continue to campaign. And they might not have all the ambition that is needed, which is again why we need to campaign. But we are definitely in a better place, possibly than we have ever been, in that people who have decision-making powers increasingly are aware about this, increasingly understand about this, and most particularly understand what their powers can do to be able to make the difference. So one of the things that I want to put in the chat in relation to this is a piece of work that we have recently published, which is a report into the comprehensive analysis of all the powers that local authorities have actually got that can make a difference on climate, clean energy and clean air. Now, that's not just bits of legislation that have got net zero or low carbon or whatever on the tin, but that are actually probably designed to do other things but can make a material difference on climate. Because what's really helpful about the conversations that we're having now is that everybody in this call understands that there isn't one silver bullet. Let me tell you, I've been doing this for far too long, being cornered at dinner parties and at weddings by somebody who authoritatively tells me that there's a one silver bullet. And I have to sort of politely extricate myself before I lose my temper. But now we know that there's lots of things that need to be done. Every single piece of legislation is either a facilitator or a limiter to our ability to be able to tackle climate. And therefore, analysing the powers that local authorities have got has been really helpful for our members, of which there are now more than 100 across England, Scotland and Wales, more than 60 of whom have made a net zero target by 2030 across their own assets and 2045 across their whole communities. Those now can understand what levers are at their disposal. Now, what we've found is the limits of those powers. And I think this is really important because we encourage our members at all times to learn from each other about how to use those powers effectively. And it's really helpful for people who want those decision makers to be able to do much more, is to understand what is limiting their ability to be able to do these things in order to be able to unlock those limitations, overcome those barriers or whatever. And some of those things are about capacity and resources at local level. Sometimes it's know-how, and I think this is particularly important when hearing from Amy about the wealth of experience there is in the wider community about some of the things that need to change, and why the importance of co-design and involvement of communities in finding solutions is that sometimes the officers sat in the town hall will be thinking of it in one way, and actually the community and some of whom might actually be experts in particular things can help them unlock. They might not always end up being exactly the perfect solution. They might not be exactly the solution that they propose, but that dialogue is absolutely vital. The other one is literally resources, enough officers to do the stuff. And I'll give you an example of that in our report, which I will just pop in the chat now so that you have it for everyone. I'll do a host for everybody. Yeah, is that right? Why can't I do it? Everybody? Yes, that's better. what we did on all kinds of things. One example is the minimum energy efficiency standards. Now, I know there's lots of people on this call who will know a lot about that, right? And one of our members actually described it as not being worth the paper it's written on. Why? Because they simply do not have the resources to enforce it. So I've been sitting on panels with politicians at this Labour Party conference this week, and I'll be sitting on panels with Conservative politicians next week who will say, oh, we need to change this rule, or we need to change that rule. And I just say, you give them the opportunity to be able to use the rules they've got and then change the ones that aren't working. Another one that needs to change, for example, to be able to make cities do much more, is change the EPC certificates on housing. Really boring. You're not going to put that on a placard anytime soon, Katie. I know that, but once eventually you get in the room, you have to have a list of practical practical options that decision makers can take. So looking at that power, the other thing that limits the powers that local authorities have got is actually national regulation and legislation. And this is when the power of the coalitions of actual practical decision makers in our cities across the country can leverage more opportunity to be able to change those rules nationally. Because a really simple one is, I know that lots of people want to see more EV charging all across your cities in order for people who absolutely need a car, and that's not everybody, but people who absolutely need a car can charge up a vehicle and use it either to get around the city if need to be, or go and see their loved ones further away. We all have people that we love further away than just around the corner. Why is that difficult to do? Because when you get the money to be able to do it, quite often the people who are in charge of the pipes and wires, boring jargon alert, the DNOs, will say, oh yeah, no, we've got some capacity on the grid round the corner, down that back alley in the far end of a car park. Yeah, you can put 4 chargers in there. And decision makers will say, well, actually we want them in the centre of town, not only to demonstrate to people that this is important to them, but so that lots of people can use them over a period of time. Or we want to have 10 when you just said we can only have 4, or whatever it is. Now that there is no, in the current situation, there is no obligation or incentive for those or institutions, those DNOs, to work with local authorities to plan the energy system so that you can get the stuff you need in the places that you need them for the ambitions, aspirations, and needs of the community. And those are the things that need to change. So I'm really delighted that what we have on this call today is a coalition of people who understand the importance of the problem, a coalition of people who are willing to learn from each other about what some of the solutions might be, and a coalition of people who understand the importance of power. So I would say, yes, I totally understand about sitting with duct tape on outside number 10 Downing Street. I think the first time I demonstrated, there wasn't even railings outside there, so that really showed my age. But sometimes there are ways in to make sure that people will need to listen, and you need to work out, and this is one of the hardest things when you're so worried about the science barreling towards us, and the patience that you need for politics to work in your direction. But eventually you will be able to get in to have those conversations with decision makers if you learn to walk around in their shoes. I'll give you one example about what is so successful about those climate strikes that you're involved in, Katie, and why we've got this change now. Is we have been recruiting members since we set up in 2016, and I know the change that happened once the climate strike started and why we ended up with those climate emergency declarations, because we had officers in those town halls and councillors walking up those town hall steps to go into meetings who were having to walk past their own children and their children's friends. And there's nothing more embarrassing than having to do that and justify your decisions over the breakfast table for people who make decisions. So don't underestimate your power to be able to change the minds of people who have power themselves. And that is power, and that is what we can absolutely do. So cities are not just the people in the town halls. This is why we've got those 2 levels of commitments that we've got our net zero members to do on their own assets by 2030 and on the whole community by 2045. Why that? Why ahead of 2050? Because we want the most ambitious to go further and faster, because there will always be laggards. And why? We build in the need for them to be able to call for changes in the rules nationally if they are going to meet their own commitments. And that drives them on to ask for those legislative changes. They will need your help. So I'll end with an ask. Please be patient. I'm so pleased you're doing that resilience work, Katie. It's absolutely essential. The amount of times I've had to just like cop out and stop because I've overreached myself. Please make sure that you are resilient, but you need to be resilient because you need to be ultra vigilant. The amount of times 2 steps forward involve 1 step back, and that requires our patience to be able to push things forward. The laws of science are not negotiable. Politics is all about negotiation. Imagine that challenge eternally. That is what we're up against. But you have opportunity, and cities are absolutely not only the place to affect that change, but also the people who will help you make bigger change in the future.
Gosh, Polly, that was absolutely amazing. I have genuine goosebumps. That was so inspiring, so engaging. And what I hear you saying is that cities are a collection of citizens who have influence. Really fantastic. Fire emojis in the chat. Agreed. I'm glad that this webinar is recorded because I'm going to play your speech every morning when I wake up. Really fantastic.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Yeah. Okay. If you have any questions, just a reminder to pop that in the Q&A. I know I have 700. So now we're going to move on to Clara Fung, who is the project coordinator at Bristol Green Capital Partnership. And Clara is going to share a co-created vision for a positive future for Bristol. Over to you, Clara.
Thank you, Katie. And wow, what an energizingly real and powerfully motivating talk from Polly. So thank you for that. So last year, a year that brought so many challenges, Bristol Green Capital Partnership collaborated with the SUNEX research team at UWE to bring together partnership members and other stakeholders and experts in environmental issues to refresh Bristol's One City plan. This is to ensure that it reflects the latest knowledge of the scale, nature, and pace of change needed to achieve the city's environmental goals by 2030. The discussions that came out of this process bore fruitful insights and ambitions we wanted to capture. So these insights, along with those from the city's climate and ecological emergency strategy, have gone on to inform the creative re-envisioning of what Bristol could look like in 2030, which we are really excited to share with you today. But before we reveal the vision, let's all take a moment to envision for ourselves a future less than 9 years away. So it's 2030. What would you like to see now that's important to you? Is it something we already had in 2021 that you wanted to keep, or something we didn't have back then? It could even be a challenge that we were up against that has finally been resolved. What does that look like? However big or small, do feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. I think something I'd love to see is a library of things in at least every ward of the city, more commoning of resources that fosters a culture of sharing, cooperating, co-responsibility and social solidarity. And in this light, I hope to see more pluralistic forms of economic ownership, such as cooperative business models and community businesses. So let me try and reveal this vision. Here we go. So this, I hope you can all see that well. Let me have a look at the chat. So this illustration is based off a low carbon scenario of Bristol in 2050, created nearly 10 years ago for the Future Bristol project. And we worked with local artists and the council to undertake the re-envisioning of what Bristol could look like 20 years earlier in 2030. So as I take you on a mini tour of the city, feel free to use the chat to reflect on what you see and do not see in the vision that's surprising or important to you. So here we go. Yeah, so over here in the bottom left-hand corner, we've got the skills, training and local jobs that has developed the infrastructure to support Bristol's low carbon transition. And here are just some of these energy related infrastructures. We have an air source heat pump and solid wall insulations that we see in most of our buildings, replacing gas boilers. We have smart energy management and battery storage. And we have locally generated renewable energy that will either be community or council owned. We'll have new developments that will encourage low car ownership levels and access to local, good quality food will be sustainable and affordable for everyone. The diversity of food cultures and food choices in Bristol will be reflected in our food reputation. And similarly, with food, active travel and other sustainable solutions, be it e-scooters, e-bikes, car sharing clubs, will be convenient, affordable and accessible. Wildlife friendly, fruit growing areas in every ward would be great to see. And deliveries in the city being made by low carbon freight consolidation and distribution. We'll have 30% of Bristol's land managed for the benefit of wildlife. We'll have zero waste zones and circular economy practices commonly used by businesses, and citizens of Bristol are democratically involved to help make our city fair, healthy and sustainable. I hear we've got some more exciting speakers to get back to, so let's return to 2021 and I'll stop sharing. That was a quick whiz through what Bristol could look like in 2030. There is still more to explore in your own time, and you can do so by downloading this vision from the link that has been shared in the chat. I recommend that you do download the file for the full interactive effect. Na yi gay, meaning crisis in Cantonese, is made up of two characters. The first means danger, but the second means opportunity and crucial point. The journey to 2030 will be hard and challenging, but the opportunity is there to build a better future for everyone that respects the capacity of our planet. We are at a crucial point, which is why it's vital that we have positive collective visions to motivate and engage more people in shaping the future we want to create. I'm going to change my background. So we really want this to be used as a tool to spark imaginations, seed more aspirations and visionary ideas, and further our sense that another future is imaginable and possible. Fortunately, this is not the only vision of Bristol's future. Whether it's been visualized or not, we all have our own visions as individuals and collectively, whether that is in our community groups, organizations, businesses, or institutions. We've probably already had glimpses of it shared in the chat. There'll be future opportunities for everyone to get involved in co-creating other vision pieces, so do make sure to look out for them. And once you've had a proper exploration of our 2030 vision, you'll have a chance to get any reflections and ideas down and share them with others on a collaborative virtual board. Details of this will be shared in the follow-up email after this event. And of course, if you've seen any creative visions that have caught your eye, share them in the chat or later on the virtual board. We want and need multiple visions and perspectives to coexist. So let's find the ways that they can complement each other, because with greater diversity of thoughts and voices, will there be greater collective resilience and capacity to adapt, respond, and thrive in the face of crisis.
Thank you, Clara. And thank you to everyone who is using the chat function to share their positive visions. We talk a lot about the need to rewild land and to rewild our surroundings, but we don't often speak about the need to rewild our imaginations. I've always found that idea really captivating. So thank you, Clara, for surfacing the need for that. And I'm now going to hand over to Asiya Yusuf, who is going to reflect on her experience as a Green and Black ambassador in Bristol and why it's so important for cities to involve and empower underrepresented groups in how transformation happens.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, thank you for all the speakers. It's really inspiring to hear from all of you. And yeah, as we heard from Amy and Polly, there are amazing pieces of work and projects related to the environment that are happening in Bristol, which is great. However, there are more that must be done. So yeah, I think that policies are important to enable the change regarding environmental issues, but equally, I believe that change should happen from the grassroots level, as a huge part of our environmental problem results from our behavior as a human being, as an individual or as a communities. That's why in this context, engaging different communities in tackling climate change or other issues has to be one of the main factors in the change. As a member of Black and Brown communities who don't really get the opportunity to have their voices heard, and which are disproportionately impacted by climate and environmental change, I believe that it's time now to get the voice of this community guiding our discussions about how we tackle these challenges. During my ambassadorship and through my engagement with Black and Brown communities, I realized that diversity among these communities is really huge. And it is vital to celebrate the different culture that we have in Bristol. And we use it as a tool for the positive change. I also learned that the intersection between environment and culture is undeniable, from agriculture to art to industries and more. And environmental engagement, it shouldn't be separated from culture. The way members of the society relate to the environment seems to be culturally patterned, which is mean that environmental engagement may differ from one culture to another. Through my research project, which was about investigating how cultural heritage influences environmental sustainability, I spoke to people from Black and Brown communities, and I found that many people from different cultures are already practicing sustainable practices for a long time, but without acknowledging the academic term sustainability. It was great to know and to learn all these sustainable practices. Using culture as a tool to engage this community in environmental conversation through something that relate to their cultures and means a lot to them, make it easier and accessible for them to be able to contribute to environmental movement in a way that suits them without using sophisticated language or environmental jargons. On the other hand, some of the people that I've met, they dream to cook their traditional food from fresh ingredients instead of importing it from abroad. Those people live near to the city farm, and they have no idea that they could hire an allotment and they can grow their own organic vegetables as they used to do in their home country, which really shame. So yeah, there is a lack of information that we need to work on it, and that I think shouldn't be difficult. Now we know there is interest and demand, but we have to engage and listen to know what's needed to enable what the environmental sector would call like sustainable practices, but these communities would recognize as normal life in their culture. There is a huge potential in Black and Brown communities to become more active in environmental sector if they get the opportunity. So we have to create opportunities for this to happen. And I think that's Black and Green Ambassador is all about opening people's mind to the potential and driving that change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Asiya, and thank you so much for your work as a Black and Green ambassador. And we heard very clearly that you have to listen and you have to engage to know what is needed. Thank you for that powerful statement. So we've got one more speaker until a 5-minute break. So I just want to check that everyone is still here, still with us. Maybe you've drifted off to your emails. Come back, because now we are going to hear from Nicola Beach. Nicola is the Cabinet Member for Climate Ecology, Waste and Energy in Bristol, and she is going to give us an overview of the progress and challenges in Bristol's efforts to tackle the climate and nature crises. Nicola is one of 3 representatives we've got from cities today. So over to you, Nicola.
Katie, and wow, this has just been brilliant so far. I'm loving the all-woman panel as well, which is obviously also a treat, frankly, still in this day and age, unfortunately. And I think I'm just going to try and share my screen. I don't want to do a death by PowerPoint, but I just think there's some important bits and bobs to talk about. It just won't be a second, sorry. Hopefully we'll have any tech problems. Give me 2 seconds. I'll happily abandon ship on it if it doesn't work. Here we go. So to the point that some of the speakers have already raised, for some people on this call, and it's brilliant how many people are here today, much of this might feel like news they're already aware of, but you know, I don't want to make any assumptions for everybody else on the call. There may be some new information here about what we've been up to in the Bristol City Council and as an administration since declaring the climate emergency and the ecological emergency. So I have to start with a massive thank you to many of the people on this call who have put their time in for free and given a huge amount of intellectual expertise, insight, passion, you know, grassroots involvement in getting both these 2 major kind of pillar documents together in the previous administration. I think it's easy to talk about Bristol One City and it's easy to talk about kind of city partners, but what that actually means is some pretty hard yards for many people in the city that have fed into these processes. The way that the Mayor Marvin will talk about our journey since declaration of the climate emergency, and then obviously at February 2020 declaring the ecological emergency, is, you know, it's easy to make those declarations, but we need to translate that into actual plans and actual, you know, doing the next right thing. How do we actually set that out? And so this enormous effort that went into these 2 documents, it sort of takes us to day 1, really, even though there's lots of the work streams happening at the same time, but it sort of put a stick in the ground to say, this is our city and this is the declaration we have taken and this is what it will take. And there is some stuff in there which is frankly scary. And so I think as we started to understand the cost of decarbonisation, what it would take to get the city where it needs to be, and who has the power to make those changes to some of the previous speakers' comments, it's, you know, increasingly clear that, you know, how you can only get through these things if we take local action, if we take collaborative action, and if we recognise the role of the council both as an enabler and also as a deliverer. And so it's not you know, a kind of grab, for want of a better phrase, and it's equally not a relinquishing of responsibilities. It is genuine partnership work. So I just wanted to say thank you to the many people on here. I've only been in this job for 5 months or so since the May election, and so I've feel incredibly blessed to have come into a role where there's this amazing grounding, and that's down to many, many people on this call. In terms of what we're doing, I think, you know, it became really clear when I took on this new cabinet portfolio that, again, it sounds really easy to say things like stop doing pesticides, and, you know, wean ourselves off those, build our water quality in the city, but you are pivoting an enormous machine in the local authority. And so one of the absolute priorities for ourselves as a council is to lead by example in our own operations. We have a really positive story to tell in the decarbonisation space, but as people more familiar with our climate plan will recognise that actually one of the key things, and it's a point that was just made earlier about accessibility of these subjects, is you have to break it apart really to understand what are we actually talking about when we talk about climate. It isn't just about energy efficiency, low carbon technologies, it is also about lots of other things to do with food growing and transport. And so it's absolutely imperative as we progress through the next few years that all the arms and legs that Bristol Council has in this space are done, frankly, and we have those action plans and that progress, tangible progress for citizens to see that actually we can be an inspirational council in this space and continue that journey. There's also a phenomenal amount of action by partners and communities. Amy spoke brilliantly, and I'm a massive advocate for community climate action plans in terms of actually reaching communities and not having all the answers for those communities. In fact, the communities need to come, you know, and are coming to us to say, here is what we need for this to make sense for us in our community. There's a big part of the role around enabling those who can pay and can go faster to invest well in their own futures. And at the moment, the national infrastructure does not exist, to be blunt. If anyone had the misfortune of trying to go through the Green Homes Grant, as I did, will testify to the fact that there's a lot of work in that space to be done. But we will continue to advocate to support people through those networks and to make the right choices for themselves, for those that can actually be more in control of their own climate future. Sorry, my computer's beeping us. And then secondly, we also, and most importantly to Amy's point about a just transition, is that our role, and very much I see as a cornerstone of my role, is actually supporting that whole city to transition. And at times that will create noise. You know, the CAS, which we can talk about in the Q&A, is one of the ultimate examples of that at the moment, about the speed to get to compliance, but the how we do that and how we lead to that change is important. So I won't apologise here today for the feeling from certain people, some people, that this is not quick enough, because actually we need to do it right, and we need to bring the whole city through that transition. And those that can should, but we need to support everyone to get to that place. And blunt instruments are not necessarily the way to do that. And finally, the point, and Polly was just a phenomenal speaker earlier, and I know something that we fed into some of that, the 100 work, is around campaigning nationally and internationally on the policy change and the autonomy that is needed in order to actually win this battle in cities. It's one of the most centrist governments in the Western world that we're currently in. We obviously had the previous Osborne dream of devolution, and I'm very pleased that we have a Metro Mayor in place now in the shape of Dan Norris, who really seems committed to this agenda. But we need to pull hard as a city and as a region to continue to grow our powers, our access to finance and our autonomy to make the policies and the decisions that we need in the city. I'll just hopefully move on. So just in terms of, we haven't really spoke much about the ecological emergency plan, so I just want to hone in on that. I have put just some information in here about, I said earlier about our journey on carbon emissions, and it's hard in short presentations like this to really bring it to life. But, you know, as a council, we are leading by example in that space, having reduced our carbon emissions by 80%, and we have our carbon neutral targets for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. There's a huge amount of activity in that space, and I'll come on to City Leap in a second, but equally around the energy efficiency of our community assets, our own office estate, the role of the moat outside of City Hall. These are all discussions that we will see come through in the next few years. On the Ecological Emergency Action Plan, just to bring that right up to date, obviously we launched that in August. It was a fantastic piece of work, and one of the two key priorities that I've picked up as an absolute priority is rolling out weaning ourselves, frankly, as a city, of the use of pesticides. It's something I care passionately about myself, and at the same time really tackling our water quality. Although I was chuffed a bit to see the story from Avon Wildlife Trust today about bees returning to the River Avon, but that, you know, water systems go way outside our city boundary, obviously, and that is an incredibly complex nut to crack, but it's something that therefore that we're prioritising as we move forward with the plan. I'm very sorry, it's saying my internet's unstable. Have you got any problems with audio, Katie?
It's a little bit laggy.
Oh, I'm very sorry. Okay, hang on. I'll slow down in that case, but I will also be quick, which is an interesting one. I just wanted to pause on City Leap, which is a big piece of work that our administration have been working on since 2017. It's essentially a giant procurement exercise to find a partner in the private sector to work with us in the renewable energy space to really kind of supercharge our ability to deliver renewables and decarbonisation in Bristol. We've got a phenomenal community energy sector in the city, and we ourselves have invested sort of millions and millions, £30 million into our own renewable energy generation. But if we stand any chance of reaching our 2030 target, we need to scale up and we need to pull that green investment into the city. We're hopeful that City Leap will bring £1 billion worth of investment into the city. And so a message for anyone here in business who works in the renewable sector is to watch this closely and get ready, because the number of skills and employment opportunities will be phenomenal as we start to work through the projects that will come out of the City Leap partnership. And some of those are, allude to what Amy was talking about again earlier about our council housing estate and the use of solar on our rooftops, the continued decarbonisation of our buildings and the estate that we manage, but also lots of investment around walking, cycling, public transport, and also planning for the mass transit. So this, I pause on this on City Leap because it's an interesting dichotomy where this is taking action for the city, and it's ambitious and it's new. It's not been done anywhere else in the country. Lots of cities are watching this to see whether it is possible for us to set this vehicle up in the city and deliver through it. And I think that it's a brave thing for the administration to do, but this is climate action in practice. You know, this is us taking control of this issue and taking it by the scruff of the neck. And so I just encourage everybody to watch it. I'm more than happy to take questions as we progress through the procurement in the coming months. I just want to pause on some of our partners as well before I wrap up. I'm mindful it's right before the break, so hopefully people are not asleep. But I just wanted to talk about some of the other kind of climate leaders that we are absolutely blessed with in the city. And for me, it's been a hugely warm welcome to come into this role and just find this huge community of people that have got these values right at the heart of, you know, their everyday life. And so there's many more partners that are not listed on this sheet here, of course. But I just, again, just to reiterate my thanks that it's an absolute privilege to be in this role and be delivering on an agenda which has got such an amazing, amazing kind of arms and legs and delivery across the region and the city. The last one I'll pause on is just a plea really from us, is I think, and it alludes to what I was talking right at the very beginning about what is climate delivery, and one of the big things that we need to do is pull that apart and actually talk about all the different things. And Polly was referring to, what are all the levers that ourselves as a council, the voluntary sector or the business sector can pull to progress us on our glide path to get to 2030, even if they don't necessarily consider that to be climate action. And so we've been working with in the One City world with some of these identities, and we're really keen that as a city we start to talk about the climate action steps we take, whether that is in food growing or in transport or in our buildings in the city, that we can start to understand that. And likewise in the nature recovery world, which is just sort of the opportunity for a city like Bristol is absolutely phenomenal to really look at kind of how we can improve the flora and fauna of our city. And I think we have all the ingredients in the city to achieve that well. The last bit was two short slides left. The next one is our climate hub, which was sort of launched a few months ago, but as we're now kind of gathering lots and lots of more content about how or what citizens can do to really support their own journey and their own action, I wanted to share this. I can put it in the chat, or I'm sure someone can bail me out and stick it in the chat for me, which is increasingly becoming a kind of a base, I guess, a HQ really for everything that you can do as individuals and what organisations can do in the city in order to move their own journey forwards. And it's just it's going to, it already is a really valuable resource, and I think it could be really, really great. The people focused part of this discussion is something that I really care passionately about, and I think my experience of the Citizens Assembly, which was a great collaboration between Councillor Asher Craig and Paula O'Rourke, who've got a huge amount of respect for both women, bringing forward this incubator idea of bringing a Citizens Assembly to Bristol and really getting that view across the whole city about the issues that we face and how can we create that better future for Bristol. And I would just love to see more collaboration in this way in future, sort of really led by the individual voices, stories, experiences and hopes and fears of our citizens across the city. And as we run up to COP, I'll end on this final point here. Much of what I was coming to talk about today is being raised already in terms of kind of what are those enabling conditions that as a local authority we need to create in order to create the city that everyone on this call will want to see. You can see on here that there's a huge dynamic around kind of people, so whether that's engagement, skills, or the action of individual kind of policymakers nationally, locally and internationally. As we run up to COP, you'll hear Marvin and myself talk a lot about the autonomy and ability for city regions to make decisions, and a big part of that comes from funding, which leads into City Leap. And that the City Leap conversation obviously naturally links to the top left of that flower, the infrastructure point. And Cabinet next week, we're putting a paper through to expand our district heating network to deliver another sort of 2,000 homes with sort of low carbon heating. That's a long-term investment plan, kind of building on the investment that we've made in Old Market and in other parts of the city. But there's a lot more to do in that space. And so, you know, there's these opportunities in the city that we are grasping, but without that funding mechanism. And as I say, City Leap being one of those levers we can pull, you can see the kind of challenges at a local authority level of how to actually scale that up as fast as we possibly can. And the final point, and I've not heard many people talk about this yet today, and it sounds boring, I guess, but it's really, really important, which is around data. How do we know it's working? Like fundamentally, you know, it's on the ecological stuff, you can see it growing, you can see the ecosystems, flora and fauna. On the carbon stuff, understanding what the path we're on and how it is working is absolutely critical. So I'll pause there, Katie. Thank you for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it so far, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Nicola. That is the first of our 3 city instalments. And we're now going to take a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at 10:46. But just before we jump into that break, I want to flag that the partnership's work wouldn't be possible without the backing of its supporting members. So during the break, we're going to be showing a short presentation to showcase them and their work tackling the climate and nature emergencies. So we'll see you all back at 10:46. And during the break, please do submit your questions with the Q&A function and vote for your favourite. Enjoy, see you in a little while. Hi everyone, welcome back. That felt like a short break, but hopefully you had time to have a stretch, grab a cup of tea and dismantle the fossil fuel economy. We're going to jump straight back in, and as a Bristolian, I'm really looking forward to hearing about other cities' efforts, and we're now going to hand over to Claire Penny Evans. Claire is the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Public Safety in Newcastle, to give an overview of Newcastle's efforts in responding to the climate and nature emergencies. Looking forward to it. Claire.
Hi Katie, have you allowed me to put my video on?
You should be able to put your video on just from
Because you cannot start your video because the host stopped it. Sorry.
My tech elves in the background will hopefully be able to sort that. As I don't think
my video. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Nice to be here. My name is Councillor Claire Penny Evans and I'm Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Public Safety in Newcastle upon Tyne. I have got some slides which I'm just going to see if I can share with you at the moment. Share. I'm just going to go back to the top. Hopefully. There we go. View bit. Can everybody see them? I can't see the view slideshow because it's hidden by the Zoom bit. Okay, so what I was going to talk to you a little bit about today is what we've done in Newcastle, and what we've looked at in Newcastle is we declared a climate emergency in 2019 and thought, well, okay, we've declared the emergency, what do we do now? So we thought, well, we're going to set up what's called a climate change convention, which involved us setting up a climate change committee, which was a cross-party committee in the council. So that covered all of the opposition, the lead administration, to come together and look at evidence, hear evidence, and influence decisions that were being made in the council. We also decided to set up a net zero task force. Now, our net zero task force is a collaboration of all of our anchor institutions in our city. And we're quite lucky in Newcastle in the fact that, and probably a little bit unique in the fact that our hospital trust, the Newcastle Hospital Trust, declared a climate emergency as well, as did our big university. So we knew that we were all thinking along the same lines. So I know that our hospital trust is now as well currently influencing the NHS actions on decarbonisation. So it's fantastic to have them on board on our net zero task force. So it's a collaboration of the anchor institutions, including the 2 universities, the large college that we have in our city as well as the hospital trusts, our trade unions, our business communities and our voluntary sector. And we come together to discuss and pool our expertise and see how we can work together on the pathway to getting to net zero by 2030 for our city. We also decided to tap into another resource that we have. We don't have a metro mayor in Newcastle, but we are actually part of a combined authority. So we have a North of the Tyne mayor, which covers Newcastle, Northumberland and North Tyneside. So we worked with our North of the Tyne combined authority to do a citizens' assembly as well. So what we did was we put out a call for evidence and said, you know, we understand we've got all these amazing people in our city. We've got experts, we've got people who've been working on climate change and adaptations. We know you're all out there. Send us your information, send us all your ideas and we'll pull that together. So we did a call for evidence, and then we had a climate change summit in February of 2020 to just see what everybody was saying and to see if everybody was speaking along the same paths on what the main issues in our city are to help us to reach net zero. From that, we produced our net zero action plan. We published that in September 2020. And we've been working towards what we're going to do in terms of our action plan and reviewing that on a yearly basis. But it's a fluid document, and it'll change over time as we change what we see as the main issues in our city. It's influenced what we've been discussing at Climate Committee, but also what we're discussing in the Net Zero Task Force. Key themes that have come out of our Net Zero action plan are things around what is unique about Newcastle, what do we need to do around Newcastle in terms of our emissions, what's our inventory on our emissions, who do we need to be including in that, is there any other partners we need to be working with, and just basically how we can engage and get our residents involved as well as all of our other communities who've already got an interest in this area. And some of the key themes that came out for us as well were around our emissions inventory. So we know in Newcastle, it's roughly a third on transport, a third on home energy, and a third on other energy in our city. So we needed to look at what we can do around that. So our action plan has key actions, and it's linked to a Climate View website where you can see what the up-to-date things that are happening in terms of each of our action points. And it sort of steers us and the committee's work throughout the year.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to put your slides on full screen? So
I can't get to the top bit of the screen. Where,
you can move that with your cursor. And there's also the tiny button.
I can do it now, yes. Thank you. I tried to move it before and I'm really sorry about that. So right. So I did. Is that okay now for people?
That's fantastic. Thank you.
So that was the little bit I talked about the Net Zero Task Force, the Citizens Assembly and the Climate Committee. And you can see along here, you can see about the climate summit that we had and getting to that plan. That just a little glimpse of what the outside of the thing looks, and there's the actual, that might be easier to read for people as well. And this is what I said, the plan itself is a fluid document, but it's got introduction, it's got developing the plan and how we got to where we are, and then it's got the key themes, and then at the back it's got a timeline with priority actions. These actions are also linked to a Climate View website, so you can see what's happening with each of those actions as we go. And this is our inventory of our emissions in Newcastle. And as you can see, a lot of it is on energy. And that's why our net zero vision is really concentrated on what we do in terms of our carbon dioxide outputs and emissions. We've looked at the different scopes. When I talked about the Net Zero Task Force, the airport does sit on that task force and is actually developing their own action plan. But we're not at the moment including flights in that. We're looking at the transport to the airport and the actual airport itself. It's just on the boundaries of our city. This is come on. So for us, we looked at our benchmarking as well, and I'm really pleased that when I just checked previously, before I said we're like one of the only cities, I did check and see that Bristol also was a city rating for that. So you can see us there, three A ratings by the CDP, which is Climate Disclosure Project. You can see they look at the emissions and see what you're doing in terms of your action plan and your emissions. And as you can see, we're alone up there ourselves with our A rating. We've submitted our rating this year and we've got our fingers crossed that we'll keep our A rating. But our ratings and our emissions this year in terms of our action plan are very much around our individual emissions in our city this year, rather than drilling down from national figures that it was previously looked at. We're also part of the Global Covenant of Mayors, and we're compliant with that. Just wanted to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in our city as well. I mean, it sounds fantastic, all the work that's been going on in Bristol, and it'd be really good to like share those good practices and link up and see where we can sort of learn from each other. We've been really successful in some of our bids to the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund. So it says on here that's 27.2 million for public sector. We've actually increased that now to 31 million. And we're looking at decarbonising a lot of our schools in our city and having net zero schools. And we do feel that by having some net zero schools with heat pumps in them where young children and young people can actually see what the carbon output is, they can look at how the energy is received, and they can learn all about that kind of technology from an early age. So we feel that's a really exciting thing that we're doing there. We're also looking at decarbonising some of our amazing buildings. We have an amazing Theatre Royal in our city. Really fantastic historic building. We're a little bit nervous about what we're going to do around that because it's such an amazing building, but we're looking to do that in our net zero for our theatre, our library and our civic centre. Another amazing project that we've been doing here as well is we've had been able to do 17 flats in a building to do a ground source heat pump, which has been amazing to do a whole block of flats, see that as a pilot, and we're going to be looking at the impact that has on fuel poverty as well as what it's doing around our net zero and carbon emissions. So that's 17 flats in a block of flats, and they're young people's flats. So we're looking forward to seeing about what we're going to be doing with that and hopefully rolling that out. Because we do recognise one of our big issues is the retrofit of our properties in our city. And that's why we're also looking to do work around energy efficiency with our private sector as well, and seeing what they can do around that. We were quite lucky in getting 315 heat pumps as well that were available for residents in our city. And the other exciting thing that we announced just the end of the summer was our successful bid to re-establish a northeast community forest. So that's working with 6 local authorities. We've led the bid on that. So that's working with our neighbours in North Tyneside, South Tyneside, Gateshead, Durham, and it's about creating a new community forest, and it will involve planting 6,000 hectares of trees and hedgerows, and that's the equivalent, 1 hectare is the equivalent to 1 rugby pitch. So it's an awful lot of trees, and we're really excited about that. What we've done in our city as well is done quite a lot of work with engagements around summits and young people summits, as well as community summits. And we recently did, in March, we did an event which was a race to zero, where we challenged some of our university students to come up with some ideas around how we can tackle the climate emergency and the ecological emergency. And we had some fantastic ideas. We've got our young people summit coming up in a couple of weeks, and we are partnered as a city with Nancy in France. And what we've managed to do for our young people summit is we're having it in a cinema, and we've got a global link to the Global South. So we'll have some students and young people from the Global South talking about their experiences, but we're also going to have our links to Nancy as well. So we've got students talking in Newcastle, talking to French students, talking to students from around the world about their views and what they want us as city leaders to do around climate action and net zero. So that's a fantastic event. I'm really looking forward to that. I think I might run over if I just keep going, so I think I'll end there and stop sharing my screen. So it's just to give you an overview of some of the things we've been doing around getting access to involving people, but also around putting things into place around technology, but very much around having that action plan that's forging us through what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you, Newcastle. really fantastic discussion surfacing, but we really want to make time for a Q&A. So we're going to hand over quickly to Glasgow. And I'm introducing Councillor Anna Richardson, who is the City Convener for Sustainability and Carbon Reduction in Glasgow. Please do put any questions you have in the Q&A, and we're going to jump straight into that after we hear from Anna.
Thank you, Katie, and I will try and keep it brief as possible so that we can get to the Q&A. First of all, thank you so much for inviting Glasgow along to share some of our climate journey so far. As with all the other cities that we've heard from, we have a huge amount of work already going on across many, many sectors to make significant progress on our emissions reduction. We have committed to becoming net zero carbon as a city by 2030, having surpassed our 2020 emissions targets comfortably. I'm optimistic about this very big challenge that we have ahead, and certainly about our determination to meet it. So I'd like to cover just a little bit of our approach to the climate and ecological crisis and some of the challenges that I think will be familiar and we've heard about already today. And then I'd like to just talk about a few of the successes and the projects that I feel have shaped our story so far. Obviously, I don't have time to cover everything, but hopefully a couple of snapshots will give you a sense of the good things that are happening and the way that we're taking things forward in Glasgow. So I've been Convener for Sustainability since 2017, and my priority at that point was to put climate on everyone's radar. It couldn't be left to the sustainability team to take this work forward for the city. It had to be mainstreamed through all of our service delivery. The IPCC report and the Youth Climate Strike movement that's been talked about this morning did a lot of that work for me, and the subsequent announcement that we'd be hosting COP26 certainly hasn't hurt either in terms of raising up everyone's agenda across the city. Our climate and ecological emergency declaration was followed by a working group and then a climate plan. But also we've been developing a circular economy route map, which I think addresses some of the comments that I've seen in the chat around green growth, and also a series of other strategy and policy documents that have a far stronger climate focus running through them than previous iterations. At the heart of our climate approach has been a firm commitment to improve the lives of our citizens and our communities. We have committed not to take climate actions that will disadvantage those that are already facing inequalities, and also to actively tackle inequality through the actions that we do choose to take forward. We are very aware that we must improve living standards and tackle the everyday concerns of residents as we decarbonise. And we acknowledge that we can't address this alone, so we've drawn up action plans that simply won't be deliverable by the Council alone, unless partners, businesses and other stakeholders get on board and move forward with us, and we are seeing that happening. We're facilitating the conversations in the city that need to happen, such as through circular forums specifically focused on challenging sectors such as textiles and construction. We're offering businesses a framework through which they can play their part with our Sustainable Glasgow Business Charter, and we are working as well on citizens' assemblies and engaging with our communities directly. So as I said, I'd like to share just a few of the stories from our climate action so far. Back in 2017, we committed to delivering a low emission zone, the first in Scotland, by the end of 2018. It was a tight timescale, and it was even more challenging given that the Transport Act that would enable this wouldn't actually come into force until 2019. But we knew that we had to act on air pollution without delay, and using the data available to us, we were able to demonstrate that upgrading the city's bus fleet first would bring the greatest benefits. So thanks to Scottish Government funding and a lot of partnership working, we implemented a scheme that will mean that all buses passing through the city centre should be Euro 6 by the end of next year. The climate agenda has raised the profile of electric vehicles, so I'm pleased that operators will continue to increase their zero emission fleet as well as this existing air quality commitment. And we are intending that all vehicles going into the zone will be Euro 6 compliant by mid-2023. And as this is a scheme that's based on a penalty fine and not a daily charge, we expect to see some behaviour change. And this will complement other projects that we're taking forward to significantly reduce vehicle journeys going through our city centre. But already emissions have reduced, and that's already showing in our air quality monitoring. We've positioned this policy as very much about improving health and therefore tackling inequality. And I think that captures Glasgow's approach to climate action. And since transport is such a significant contributor to our city's emissions, as we've already heard from other speakers, we know that we need to act quickly on this issue. So as well as our work to improve the bus network, we have a real focus on active travel as a fast and effective way of providing zero emission transport. During the pandemic, we implemented our Spaces for People programme, which included accelerated school street rollouts, several pedestrianisation projects in high profile locations, pavement widening in the city centre to enable outdoor hospitality to happen more safely, and over 40 kilometres of pop-up cycle lanes. Following an independent review, I was delighted that we were able to secure agreement to retain all of these measures, which will now be upgraded as necessary. I don't think anyone believed it was possible to create so much change so quickly before the pandemic hit. I believe it's now given us the confidence to consider an appropriate climate emergency response on a similar scale. So while we have a wide range of significant and high quality active travel and public realm projects currently in design or already under construction, we're now bringing forward a proposal to build a comprehensive city network over the next 9 years, with approximately 270 kilometres of cycle lane still to be built to deliver on that. To do so, we will require external funding on a scale unlike before, and we'll need to find new ways of working too. We're calling this faster approach Spaces for People Plus, not the hasty installation with zero consultation that we had to do during the pandemic period, but an understanding that we simply don't have time for this project to be done entirely through big engineering measures. Instead, we need to focus our efforts on the junctions and the pinch points along otherwise straightforward routes. We're going out to consultation on this plan this month, and I'm hopeful that it will be received positively. And as we're all aware here today, the ecological emergency is as pressing an issue as the need to reduce emissions. In Glasgow, we are proud of being the Dear Green place, but despite over 90 parks, we still need to do better to improve our natural environment. We're planting up a series of wildflower meadows and increasing biodiversity wherever we can. And we're planting more trees. We've established a new woodland in the city with over 20,000 trees to be planted. But what makes this woodland particularly special is that as part of phase 2, we're partnering with a local project, the Lost Woods. This was a group of individuals from Glasgow who set up a project who wanted to involve children from every single Glasgow primary school ahead of COP. They came to us with this idea 2 years ago, and it felt like a hugely ambitious and inspiring task, and I couldn't have loved it more than I did. And I'm absolutely delighted that the acorns that they delivered to all the primary schools in Glasgow before the first lockdown have resulted in saplings that have been kept safe and are being nurtured ahead of us bringing children from the primary schools on site over the next few weeks to assist with their planting. This COP26 legacy of a children's woodland has enabled our youngest citizens to be part of the climate solutions that we're working on. And we're also seeking solutions to very specific Glasgow challenges, but ones which I think resonate further afield as well. For example, the huge number of tenement buildings that house our people. So we have a pilot programme with partners at Glasgow University and Southside Housing Association of a deep retrofit of one full sandstone tenement building. This will include significant insulation, cladding, and some heat pump installations. This project will identify the most effective ways to improve these homes while not losing their traditional and much loved character. We need to address the housing stock that we have and work out how to tackle that affordably to be able to make significant cuts to our heating emissions. And we need to be taking on fuel poverty for those citizens as we do so. So I've just given a very brief taste of the size and scale of our ambition and our determination to take on the tough challenges that will need to be made, while also keeping our people and their quality of life at the heart of our climate work. I also think that highlights where our challenges lie. We know that we're already going in the right direction, and our emissions reductions to date prove that. But that also means that the low-hanging fruit has been picked off already. Now we need to accelerate our pace greatly on the tough things. That's going to mean huge amounts of community engagement to bring people with us at the same time as they're seeing a lot of change already happening in their city. And it's also going to need a level of investment that comes through consistently and in line with our ambition and commitments. It's going to require action on all fronts consistently and quickly. And it will need strong political support and the courage to make the decisions that matter without any delay. The Scottish Government has been incredibly supportive of our work so far. And there are new opportunities ahead, such as a significantly increased national active travel budget. But deep decarbonisation is going to be an expensive task, which we cannot do alone. It will require new ways of working to unlock funds wherever they can be made available and to deliver at the pace that this emergency asks of us. I truly believe that our cities and our communities will thrive if we step up to this challenge and if we work together for our shared future, for we simply can't afford to achieve anything less. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Throughout your talk and throughout all of the other talks, our audience have been submitting some questions. So we're going to have a little look at what questions have come up and pose them to Polly, Claire, Anna and Nicola. So if you can all join me with your videos, we will get stuck in. So our first question is from Oliver, and it's for all panelists, but due to time restrictions, I'll just ask one person to step forward for this. And the question, which I will copy and put in the chat, is what role can public procurement, social enterprises and cooperatives play to bring about a just transition, preventing money leaking out of local economies, enhancing economic democracy and protecting ecology? How can we as citizens and organisations support these? So a fantastic question, our highest rated question. I'll pop it in the chat. Is there someone who'd like to step forward for this one?
I'm happy to do so if you'd like.
Yes, please, Polly.
Katie, I think it's a really, really, really good question. And in fact, I upvoted it. I'll be honest, because I think it's a really important question to answer. And one of the reasons why I think it's really important is because you have got procurement powers at city level and local authority level, and people need to understand how those procurement powers work and argue for them to be more ambitious. What's really interesting is that quite often you'll have a procurement policy that will try to do lots and lots of things, of which sustainability and climate action will be a part. And actually what you can do is to use it to create a wider economy that achieves what you want to achieve. Because if you want to procure locally, that might actually make it harder to achieve your climate action if your local communities, businesses and so forth have not already embedded sustainable practices. That's completely normal. Loads of small and medium-sized businesses are really struggling to be able to organise themselves, and they won't have a sustainable procurement policy to be able to pull off the shelf. So when you say to them, what's your carbon reduction strategy for using your cars or your vans and so forth, they might get a bit baffled, whereas somebody really big will go, oh yeah, no, we've got a huge fleet, we'll be fine, don't worry about that. So understand that this is something that enables you to do exactly what I was talking about in terms of transforming the whole community. But it might require you to be quite patient about expecting people to be able to meet your expectations immediately if you want them them to meet other social equity ambitions that you've got for your community. And in the meantime, you might have to go for somebody quite big, kind of off the shelf, and that's not necessarily great. But just understand that your procurement policy demonstrates quite a lot about what you want your community to be like, and you might have to do a few trade-offs because you need to understand that not everybody is ready for what's required. And that requires, again, patience, but it also requires you as a local authority to say, right, my role is to not to bully people into this, but to create some kind of leadership and critical friend role. So I really emphasize procurement is so important. Two big ones that local authorities have got: procurement and planning. You've got a lot of money, not as much as you'd like, a lot of money coming in, and you procure public services for people. That is an enormous potential for transformation of your place.
Thank you, Polly. The next question is direct to Nicola. And this question is: one of the greatest threats to Bristol's environmental crisis is the council planning department's overriding of local democracy in favour of private housing developers. What suggestions do you have about how to tackle this unprincipled alliance which prioritises profit over the planet? And that question comes from Anita, who references the loss of the M32 maple trees.
I mean, the first thing I'd say is probably get a new government would probably be the single biggest thing, because you are correct that we do hold the development management function in the council, but we also don't set national planning policy. I know Anita quite well, so hi Anita. I think, you know, the I'll take it. Yeah, I think it's interesting that one of the things that has been mentioned by the other speakers but hasn't been mentioned hugely in this is the triple crisis that we actually face, because we also have a housing crisis, and it would be absurd to come on a call like this and not talk about some of the single biggest interventions that can transform someone's life, and that is a roof over their head. And so, you know, we unapologetically as an administration since 2016 have had a homes agenda. And what's been interesting since May, coming into this second term for Mayor Marvin Rees, is how that agenda pivots around some of these big pillar issues like climate and ecology that we're talking about today. And very much the construct of my role is having my planning background. I used to be the cabinet member for planning after all, coming into this role and actually understanding how do we leverage the best outcomes from a fairly rigid, albeit changing, context of national planning policy. So I hope that gives you some indication. There is no unholy alliance. Like our planners, and Marvin will say this, Polly was talking about it before, you don't see people campaigning on placards on the street for legal teams and for planning officers and arboriculturalists, you know what I mean? Because they're like the bits behind the scenes in the kind of the engine room of the council. But we have a really phenomenal group of people that work in our planning system. So I just also have to correct the fact that any idea that there's this some Machiavellian project to remove trees from our city, because I don't think anyone would want to do that.
Thank you, Nicola. Really interesting. I'd now like to direct a question to Anna, actually, and this question comes from Mark. The question is, do you feel that time for disruptive demonstrations are over, given the damage that it can cause to more deprived areas like mine? He gives the example of Lawrence Weston. And that one to you, Anna, particularly considering the impacts of demonstrations at COP26 in Glasgow.
I think it's a really good question. Certainly in Glasgow up till now, demonstrations have tended to be around the city centre. They have been very positive. The youth climate strikes have been very well received, and certainly all we've done is reduce a little bit of traffic through the city centre, and I'm never going to complain about that. Obviously, we do have we have the opportunity for really significant protests. We're expecting that around COP, and certainly those will be very large and have a significant impact on the city on those few days that they're happening. And again, as a city, we've said that we welcome positive protest. We welcome any protest that is not causing damage to our city. In terms of the specifics around where those disruptions happen, it's not something that I'm terribly aware of being an issue in Glasgow. So I'm not entirely sure, in terms of the specifics of that question and in terms of where protests are happening. In Bristol, perhaps things are slightly different there. So I wouldn't feel able to answer that part of the question.
Thank you for that. And just finally, just Claire, question for you, just so everyone's had a chance to talk. The next most popular question was, how do cities start to understand themselves as part of the city region / bioregional ecosystem in an urban / rural dynamic? So how can cities heal the dislocation between urban and rural to create resilient agroecological just food systems? Really interesting question.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think one of the things that we have to understand is that obviously all cities are different and they have a different makeup and the way they are. And I think what we need to do is make sure that we're all learning from each other. And the temptation, I think, with what we were talking, I think what Nicola was talking about housing is that sometimes cities spread out so far that you're losing some of that green belt, that green spaces that are really important for our communities, and you then become part of the next neighbouring city, and it's great. But for us, we are really lucky in Newcastle in the fact that, I don't know how many people have been, but we've got an amazing park that runs through the city. We've got we've got the town moor, which we don't actually, a lot of people keep saying to me, can we do all these amazing things on the town moor? Because we still have cows in our city, which are on the town moor. But we don't have, that's run by the freemen of our city. So for me, it's about protecting the green spaces that we have, ensuring that all of our communities have access to green spaces, and get back to looking at how we can re-establish some of that nature and ecology in some of our more deprived areas of our city. And so that's whether that's pocket park, encouraging a bit of guerrilla gardening, whether that's looking at things around street trees, which, you know, some of our residents don't like, but other residents are desperate for a bit of greenery, because I think the more we have green canopies and cover as well, it'll help us in terms of heat and, you know, heat waves. So it's, to me, it's about what we can do, but we need to learn from each other, and certainly listen to what our other cities that might have a little bit more experience of that have already been doing. Because I don't want to reinvent the wheel on anything. I think it's really important that we share our practice and our experience, and that we link together as cities as well as towns and villages, and all get together on this, because it's not something anybody can do alone.
Absolutely. And I feel like that is absolutely what we've been doing today. So a massive thank you for our 3 councillors, and to Polly as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the Q&A. I wish it could be longer. I wish we could be here all day. But thank you very much. It's been a fantastic event. So in the final portion of our call this morning, we want to leave you with some inspiring stories from the city. So we're going to share with you just a few stories of what's taking place here in Bristol. And we want to encourage you to share what you're doing in your organisation in the chat. So I'm going to be first handing over to Jenny Foster. And Jenny is the project lead for the Global Goals Centre. And Jenny is going to introduce a short video as part of the Bristol 17 campaign. We've got 5 stories to go through, so every person who comes and shares, please just be very mindful of time, just so we're not keeping here people longer than they have signed up for. Over to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Katie. So at the Global Goals Centre, we're trying to engage people with the Sustainable Development Goals and inspire them to take action. But many people haven't heard of the goals. There's 17 of them. They can be a bit overwhelming. So we're working at how we can make them relevant to people in their lives. So we invited 17 community organisations to nominate a hero against each of the goals. And we've made a short film on each of them with a call out to the viewer to take action themselves. And it's a great way to amplify the voices of those community organisations, as well as making it very real. Friends and family of each of the heroes have obviously shared the content. So they're all online, #Bristol17. Please do look out for the campaign and share them where you can. And we want to share with you one film today, which is the Climate Action film. And our hero is Katie Cross from the Misfits football team. As Ben, our hero for Goals 17, said, people are more likely to do something about climate and stuff like that if they hear about it from people in their own communities. And that's absolutely right. And that's why we're running this campaign. So please enjoy the film and share them where you can. #Bristol17. Thanks.
If one Ashton Gate's worth of fans simply reduce their shower time to 5 minutes, the amount of carbon emissions saved is the same as taking over 2,000 cars off the road. Pledgeable is an organisation that encourages primarily football fans to make sustainable lifestyle choices in support of their teams. So at the moment, climate change has felt very much like it's being done to me, and that I have very little power to do anything. So I decided, right, I need to have a look and see what actually we can do. And when I looked at the small changes that we could make and shared them with my football team, and then looked at the stats, so the amount of carbon emissions you can save as a group of people is actually quite overwhelming. Everybody has an interest and cares about something, and every single one of those interests will be impacted by climate change.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for sharing that video. There are links in the chat for more information, and I'll now pass to Jo Watts, Operations and Sustainability Manager at Wiper & True, which is a very popular brand in my household.
Hello, good morning, everyone. What an inspirational morning so far. Thank you very much for inviting me to share our story at Wiper & True. Hopefully many of you have had the pleasure to drink our beer. So what I just wanted to explain is some of the main challenges that we're facing in the brewing industry and some of the solutions to these environmental impacts that we're making. So what we've seen over the last decade is an explosion of the craft beer market, but and some people have described it as the new golden age of brewing. Yet what we have found as the number of breweries have grown is that we've seen a growth in small, inefficient, and not very sustainable breweries. So whilst the bigger breweries have the resources and investment to bring their carbon footprint down, smaller breweries have less staff resource, less funds to invest in sustainable projects. So what you see is a growing industry without necessarily the means to tackle the sustainability challenges. So what are some of these challenges? One key challenge, which we're really focused on at Wiper & True, is commissioning an impact assessment of your business, because only then will you get a really clear idea of where your carbon emissions are coming from. So it's so important for the little money that you may have to invest in sustainability is to strategically and effectively pinpoint it once you know your carbon footprint. Then a balance between the lower hanging fruit and the bigger emissions projects that can take more time and more money is really important to get right, because you don't want to put all your eggs into the big ones while you can pick off loads of the smaller ones for a lot less money and time. And then one of the massive things in the brewing industry that's often overlooked is efficiency of the brewery. So trying to make it more efficient is so important. So investing in the right kind of equipment, and that is so important. And then a part of that is upskilling your workforce, because only they can really truly affect your efficiency. So really important to look after your workforce. And also, once you need an upskilled workforce, you need to look after them in terms of their mental health, and it's a fast-paced and intense environment. So supporting them with their life and work challenges is critical to sustainability. And finally, one very important challenge is having extra influence on your Scope 3 emissions, because in a brewery, they make up most of your carbon footprint. So whilst you have more influence in your Scope 1 and 2 emissions, they're arguably a lot smaller. So having influence in Scope 3 is really important. So just to highlight a few of the things we've been working on at Wiper & True is we've committed to net zero by 2030 to line up with the city. We've just begun our path to becoming a B Corp certified business, and they'll form the backbone of our whole sustainability program. And the most exciting thing that we're just starting at the moment is setting up the first ever Bristol Breweries Climate Leaders Group. So I've already spoken to a lot of the breweries, and we're all going to come together to line up with COP26, and we're going to talk about all of the challenges that we face, all of the successes and failures, and hopefully start to have a greater influence on the industry wider than Bristol, and start conversations across the whole nation. We are working with key consultants to focus in our carbon footprint and tackle those bigger challenges, because they are complex and we need experts to tell us what to do, such as anaerobic digesters, CO2 recovery plants. We're also working with our landlords on putting solar panels on all of our roofs, but it has come with its challenges. There's been a few sticking points, as some of you may know on this call. And of course, we're investing in more sustainable brewing equipment and developing diversity, equality and inclusion policy with training for all of our staff, and backed up with a mental health awareness program to look after all of our staff. And so just in summary, very quickly, I know I'm probably going over a little bit, but there are a great many challenges around brewing, but there's none so far that I think are insurmountable. And we found many creative ways to rethink problems, tap into expertise, and as long as there's self-belief and relentless determination, getting to net zero, I think, is a possibility for all breweries worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Socially conscious beer, we love to see it. We're running a little bit over. We've got two more speakers. I really encourage you to stay if you can. We should be between 5 and 10 minutes over. So I'm now going to hand over to the incredible Emma Blake-Morsey, a multidisciplinary arts producer who's going to talk about their billboard campaigns for the Rising Arts Agency and the Cabot Institute.
Hiya, sorry, that was a slight little delay there. But hi, I'm so happy to be with you all today. Like Kate has actually so lovely said, I'm a multidisciplinary arts producer, working across photography, words, graphics, film and events. I'm also non-exec director for Rising Arts Agency and Bristol Council's cultural member. But I've also been trained as a creative intersectional environmentalist, following quite a few years in STEM, where my research consists of developing sustainable circular system that repurpose waste substances. But really excitingly, early on in the year, I was commissioned by University of Bristol's Cabot Institute for the Environment through Rewilding to use the power of visual storytelling for their COP26 billboard campaign, where I was able to create visual artwork designs that really simplified the complex sustainability research by the Institute. What was really amazing about this is that the billboards are able to focus on 3 key aspects. One being dry lands, which impacts the lives of over 2 billion people, as well as WASH, which stands for water, sanitation and hygiene, and the glaciers research, which is all about turning sediments from melting glaciers into sustainable fertilizer for agriculture. What was so special is that each one was uniquely delivering solutions for global climate challenges, and it really reflects my work in which I try to challenge approaches to both inclusion and innovation in space I work in, often producing work that can be experienced by all, but most importantly gives visibility to and engages those from marginalised groups. So when working with large institutions like Cabot Institute, it was important for me to consider how to widen that impact. And so we decided for COP26 that we would sell eco-friendly prints where the profit will go towards organisations who are led by and actively platform Black environmentalists like myself. And what was also really special and really hones in, which I think a lot of people have touched on as well earlier today, is that when you consider that Indigenous people represent 5% of the global population, but actually in fact protect 80% of global biodiversity, being inclusive in this way is so vital. And so more recently, as part of my artist residency for Norris Media Centre's Come Together programme, I've been exploring how to create hybrid outdoor experiences for both in-person and virtual attendees, with the hope to connect local marginalised people with the already existing network of local outdoor groups, while illustratively sharing the stories of local residents who do take part, while recognising the richness of outdoor knowledge already within marginalised communities and the barriers that make it historically inaccessible in Western contexts. I'm super aware my 2 minutes are up, but if you're interested in the work I do, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Emma. You are genuinely amazing. I wish we could have you for longer.
Thank you so much.
We're now going to play a short video from Jonathan Parr, co-head teacher, and Tom Walmsley, an environment education expert, and they are from Henley's Junior School, who I believe are zooming in from their classroom. So big hello to you.
Welcome to Henley's Junior School. We started our sustainable living curriculum a couple of years ago. It's going brilliantly and we're really excited to tell you about it. Our school council wanted to think about what food we eat, and so they organised a vote. The Green Ambassadors are going to tell you more.
Now we've got meat-free Mondays.
We wanted a nature zone in our school, so we got him some help from Mr. Tom and built this.
It means we'll have more biodiversity in our school grounds. It means we have more variety of plants and animals. Whenever I go into the nature zone, I feel calm and relaxed.
So our Green Ambassadors spoke to all the children in the school about what they wanted, and the reply was loud and clear. They wanted a wonderful, fantastic new nature zone and also an outdoor classroom to come and learn in.
We really wanted this outdoor classroom, And now we're begging our teachers to come out here for every lesson. Especially to learn about climate change.
So for our sustainable food curriculum, what Tom's done is helped us by building these raised beds, and the children are going to be growing their own food. We're going to be using it in the kitchen. We really want to think about food miles and understand where our food comes from.
I'm going to fill this bed with strawberries and eat them all.
Unfortunately, the only thing that we can't grow is grapes. And we're really looking forward to growing carrots too.
At Henleys Junior School, we love trees. We've already planted some on our big field, but our next plan is to talk to the community and the council about planting all the way round the perimeter.
It's the part we're doing this daily, Maya.
That was absolutely lovely. Hopefully we can share a link to that in the chat as well, so we can rewatch it later. Our final story comes from Penina Achieng-Kinberg from African Voices Forum, talking about their involvement in the Our Air, Our City campaign, which is fantastic.
Thank you, Katie. It's been a very interesting morning hearing about all of the stuff that's really going on and some of the ambitions that that have been shared here in trying to drive the campaigns and the environmental crisis that we're facing. So my name is Penina Achieng-Kinberg, and I'm from African Voices Forum. This is an organization that was set up in Bristol in 2008. And its main aim is to empower people of African heritage. And we get involved in different sorts of campaigns around social justice. Some of them are quite linked to the International Decade of People of African Descent across the three areas of justice, development, and recognition for the efforts of people of African descent. So we got involved in Our Air, Our City campaign, which started in 2020, and the aim of it really was to run a campaign that was going to focus the activity on raising the issues around air pollution. We know that in Bristol, many people actually do suffer from all sorts of illnesses that are arising from air pollution, whether it is in areas around St. Paul's, where, under the M32 bridge, there's a lot of pollution that is constantly released due to the traffic there. We know, for instance, that Bristol as a city, in terms of its adhering to the World Health Organization's recommendation for air quality, we are still under it. We also know that marginalized communities in Bristol actually have suffer more from this, just because of inequalities, not just in education, in also health and also other areas of governance. So we are very keen that we have a voice that represents the needs of our members and that we exercise the power to use that voice in everything that we do. Environmental justice is something that is very key to us. So the Our Air, Our City campaign had 4 demands, and at the time, I think the elections were running last year in May. So we were really targeting the electoral people who were going through the electoral system last year, try to really understand what they felt was really important and how they could respond as people who were representing us politically in the city. So we wanted them to not just be able to say this is what we want to do, but we wanted them to put into action some of the key things that we've been discussing around air pollution, and also to really educate the wider public in Bristol. And it's a good thing that we're seeing what's going on in the schools there. But I think generally the wider population in Bristol are not really aware of the wider impact of where nature starts and where man-made impact stops. So I think that there is question there around how we decolonized our whole education system, so people are able to know exactly what they're facing, whether it is in the food that we grow, whether it is in the air that we breathe, all of those areas which have got a major impact on climate. And the third demand was also about implementing active transport, depending on what the community needs are. We know, for instance, that the mayor and the administration had an intention to launch the CARS proposals last year in October. That was moved, and that's the second movement that has been done. So we're trying to look at ways in which they can address each of the needs of these communities and make sure that there's an active way of people in the way that people can access transport that actually fits in with their lifestyle. Just because, you know, we've got social economic things that we have to consider. So you cannot make a blanket decisions because you don't know how it's going to impact on one community or another. And the last bit was really about making sure that we are realigning ourselves with the guidelines from WHO. And I think last week they've actually now increased or decreased the limit for air, which means that they're recognizing that there's more of a wider impact of pollution. So they're making it much more stringent. So I think that our campaign is really trying to tackle that. And some of the key actions that we're looking to take this year before the COP26 conference starts, maybe organizing a set of street parties that could really look at, you know, what it feels like to live in an environment that is free of air pollution. And then using that as a form of a national protest so that we can actually get some kind of action to be taken by the city, especially here in Bristol. We managed to crowdfund last year, which helped us to raise a lot of awareness because we've got a membership of about 30 networks that are linked in with our city Bristol. So we're trying to make sure that we leverage all that support to come together to really put something that is really strong, that is going to really push the boundaries, so that the leaders that are coming to be, who are going to be meeting in this country within the next sort of month, will have a real sense of the urgency of the situation and to really respond to the future. Because otherwise what we're saying is that if we don't take any action now, and you know, the inequalities around health continue to increase day after day. COVID was a classic one where we could see the impact of it on our own health in terms of how we transpire, how we respond from our bodies to viruses. So we have to take all of these things really seriously. So I think AVF is really really inspired by, you know, leading and being part of these campaigns and really trying to drive that, because on the other sense, we know that it's not just Bristol. It's a global issue, if I can say that, because Africa as a continent has got the lowest emissions, and yet we're suffering the huge impact of this because we've got developing nations that are just taking decisions which are very self-centered and based on capitalist systems. So we are very keen that we're also driving change from that perspective. So thank you very much for giving me a platform.
Thank you so much, Penina. I echo the messages in the chat that street parties sound fantastic, bringing a bit more joy into our movement. Thank you for sharing that incredible work. And thank you to everyone and those 5 interjections we just had. I am leaving feeling inspired and feeling hopeful and feeling like I have a lot to digest. Thank you to all of those who stuck around. I think what we've really seen is that cities have such a huge potential to lead global action on climate and nature. And we need everyone to consider how to make a step change in climate and nature action and how to ensure that this happens in a just way. So the one question I will leave you with is, where is your place in this? So a massive thank you to our panelists, guest speakers, and the hardworking team, of course, at the partnership. And an even bigger thank you to our audience and the incredible chat which has been happening alongside this event. We hope to be able to get a transcript made available for all of you to continue and deepen this discussion. In terms of deepening discussion, please do stay in touch. You can stay in touch with me on Twitter @KTClimate, and you can also stay in touch with the partnership by becoming a member if you're not one already. We would love to receive your thoughts and feedback about this event. So you should see in the chat a short feedback form, which we'd love you to fill out. It's been such an enriching and wonderful day. It's been really enjoyable for me, and thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day and hope to see you all in person soon.